Welcome to the APUSH DIG. For this video, we turn our attention to the Civil War, America's second revolution. Rather than focusing on battles and military history, instead, I want to focus on what made the Civil War revolutionary. Here at the APUSH DIG, we are always most concerned with studying great change in U.S. history. In order for this change to take place, first the Union had to win the war. The Union becomes the forces for great change. The Confederacy becomes the force of reaction, clinging to continuity. The Union, or the North's greater manpower, industrial resources, the leadership of Abraham Lincoln and others, and the decision to emancipate slaves eventually led to the Union military victory over the Confederacy in this devastating Civil War. Let's focus on these crucial components. The longer the war lasted, the more the odds turned towards the Union's favor. The Confederacy just did not have the infrastructure to support a long war fought on their own territory. The South's greatest hope was that they could do like the colonists did in the American Revolution, outlast the will of their opponent. But this would not happen. So in looking at this bar graph, we can see the clear superiority the Union had over the Confederacy in every type of resource important during a war. Perhaps the number one reason why the South was not able to outlast the will of the North can be attributed to the leadership of Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln stayed the course. He weathered defeat after defeat. He fired general after general. He granted himself expansive new executive powers, all in the name of prosecuting the war until its very end, the surrender of the treasonous secessionists. It's not clear that any other historical figure of the time would have had the will to do any of this. The history of the presidency in the preceding decades to the Civil War was one of compromise and shrinking in the face of controversy. Lincoln stood tall, literally and figuratively. Lincoln's most strategic move was to present the Emancipation Proclamation in the middle of the war, an act of military necessity, he called it. This act single-handedly changed the purpose of the war from one to merely preserve the Union to a crusade for liberty. Before the proclamation, black men were barred from the army. After the proclamation, hundreds of thousands of black men joined the Army and the Navy of the Union. They turned the tide of the war. They destroyed the Confederacy. They won the war. The war began in 1861. 4 years later, it was over, and America would never be the same. A revolution had taken place. The Civil War guaranteed the preeminence of the Union. It abolished slavery. Now the next mission would be to define and protect freedom for African Americans. The Civil War shifted political power from the South to the North, from the slave-owning planters to the industrial capitalists. The Civil War drastically increased the power of the federal government. And finally, the Civil War accelerated the modernization of the Northern economy. The Civil War secured the preeminence of the Union. Secession would never be uttered with any sincerity ever again. Secession would be regarded as an unconstitutional act, clearly. The power of the federal government over the states would never as seriously be challenged again. The Civil War destroyed the American slave system. The Emancipation Proclamation changed the purpose of the Civil War into a crusade for freedom. The 13th Amendment to the Constitution, ratified in 1865, prohibited slavery in the United States. The Civil War also led to a major shift in the geography of political power in the United States. Before the war, 12 of the first 16 presidents had been slave-owning Southern planters. But from 1865 to 1913, Republicans were in power for 36 of the years, and a Northerner was president from 1869 to 1913. Finally, the Civil War not only propelled the northern industrial capitalist economy to its permanent state of national dominance, it also dramatically increased the power of the federal government. The federal government made itself into a complete wartime force. The size of the federal government and the size of the employee workforce tripled. Bonds were sold, a national banking system was created by Congress, a national paper currency was printed. That's where our green dollar bills come from. Retirement pensions were promised to federal employees, and income taxes were collected during the war. Government contracts with industrial producers helped bolster and then propel the interests of the industrial capitalists, leading to the formation of the nation's first corporations. Plans for Western development were passed. These included the approval of plans for a transcontinental railroad, the Homestead Act, which promoted settlement across the Great Plains, and created the Western Agricultural University System.